Grim Dawn crossbow builds, yeah.
Hi everybody, welcome to Grim Dawn Crossbow Builds, where all we talk about are crossbow builds for Grim Dawn. Our character today is a sorceress using the Ugdenbog Arcaneweaver crossbow. I'll show you what we're up to on one of the dummies. On right click we have Thermite Mine for elemental resistance reduction, and on left click we have Fire Strike fully converted to elemental damage, so that's fire, cold, and lightning damage. We also have some survivability skills on the skill bar: Flashbang, Mirror of Arioctes, and Nullification. There it is. Let's talk about our skills. The Sorceress is the combination of a Demolitionist and an Arcanist. Demolitionist is the main class, with our main skills coming from that tree. Fire Strike is hard capped and fully converted to elemental damage. It's bound to the elemental storm proc. And Fire Strike's modifiers are pretty close to the hard cap: Explosive Strike, Static Strike, and Brimstone. The chaos damage on Brimstone is converted into fire and lightning. We're using the Mutator on Fire Strike. That gives us extra damage for using a two-handed weapon, crit damage, and also total damage. Our main aura is Flame Touched, which gives flat lightning damage, fire and lightning % damage, and offensive ability. This is bound to Giant's Blood. Its modifier Temper is also above the soft cap. This physical damage is converted to elemental by our weapon, and it also gives us defensive ability. Blast Shield is soft capped for extra survivability. Thermite Mine is hard capped for elemental resistance reduction. It also has Eldritch Fire on it, which gives extra fire resistance reduction. We have 1 point in its modifier Hellfire Mine because that chaos damage is converted to fire and lightning. There's 1 point in Flashbang for extra survivability, 1 point in its modifier for fumble and impaired aim, 1 point in Vindictive Flame for extra speed and health regeneration and some retaliation damage. We also have 1 point in its modifier, Alzuin's Wrath. On the Arcanist side, Iskandra's Elemental Exchange is nearly hard capped for the flat elemental damage, which applies to all of our attacks. We also have 1 point in Overload and 1 point in Elemental Balance. These are optional. It's mainly for the extra crit damage. We don't do a lot of damage over time on this build. We have 1 point in Mirror of Arioctes for survivability, and 12 points in Maven's Sphere of Protection for damage absorption. This is bound to Arcane Barrier. 1 point in Conversion for the extra secondary resistances. We have 1 point in Star Pact simply because the exclusive skill slot was free. That gives us some extra cold and lightning damage. We have 1 point in Fabric of Reality for extra flat Aether and Chaos damage, a lot of which gets converted to Elemental. 1 point in Nullification for defense. Arcane Will is nearly soft capped, another layer of defense there. And Inner Focus is soft capped, giving us 25% extra spirit and 12% extra offensive ability. Let's take a look at our devotions. We are all over the map with this build. You can see our affinity points are fairly evenly distributed across the colors. I'll talk about the constellations in clockwise order, starting from the top. We have the first two nodes on Tempest for the flat lightning damage and physique. We have the Kraken for the two-handed weapon bonuses. And we have the Widow for lightning and Aether resistance reduction. The Arcane Bomb proc is bound to Shadow Flame, which comes from our shoulder piece. Moving to the southeast, we have the Crane for resistances and yellow points. Rowan's Crown for extra elemental damage and resistance reduction. That's bound to Fire Strike. And the Crab for elemental damage and a defensive proc, which we have bound to Maven's Sphere of Protection. Over to the west, we have the Behemoth for extra health and regen, with Giant's Blood bound to Flame Touched. Hyrian for extra elemental damage and defensive bonuses. with Hyrian's Glare bound to Vindictive Flame. Moving further to the north, we have the Hydra for the ranged weapon bonuses, with the physical damage converted to elemental, so that helps us. Soleil's Witchblade for the fire resistance reduction, that is bound to Thermite Mine. And we have most of the Ghoul complete so that we can have the Ghoulish Hunger proc, that is bound to Star Pact. Let's talk about our gear. I have the Illusion of the Shattered Realms ceremonial armor on, just because I think it looks cool with the heart fire from our chest armor. The star of our show is the Ugdenbog Arcaneweaver. This is the only mandatory piece of gear for this build to work. Everything else you can kind of switch around according to what feels good and what you're able to find. This weapon gives a pass-through chance to Fire Strike, flat elemental damage to Fire Strike and Iskandra's Elemental Exchange, full physical to elemental conversion for Fire Strike, and extra attack speed. This particular Arcaneweaver has ideal affixes. The prefix Incanters gives us extra flat and percentage-based elemental damage, and the suffix gives us extra attack speed. So we have a flat 96 elemental damage, an extra 328% elemental damage, and 32% attack speed. On this weapon we have the Seal of Resonance component and the Potent Malmoth Soul augment, which both give extra flat elemental damage. Our first ring is the Mythical Combustion Band, giving us flat fire damage and +2 to Fire Strike, along with some other nice stuff. And our second ring is a Living Ring from the Ugdenbog areas. This one has really good affixes on it, including +2 to Fire Strike, as well as the default +3 to Iskandra's Elemental Exchange. Our helm is Dagalon's Face Guard, which gives lightning damage to Fire Strike, and full Chaos to Lightning and Fire conversion with our aura Flame Touched. So that converts all the Chaos damage from Brimstone to Fire and Lightning, which really helps this build. Our amulet is the Mythical Arcane Shard of Agravix, which gives +1 to all of our skills, and extra health and damage to Vindictive Flame. Our shoulder piece is the Mythical Shadow Flame Mantle, which gives us +4 to Brimstone, and a two-handed ranged weapon proc, which is going off all the time. That's bound to Arcane Bomb. Our gloves are Mythical Turin's grips, with that flat physical damage getting converted to elemental damage, extra attack speed, and +2 to explosive strike. Our boots are Mythical Wormscale foot guards, which give us extra fire and lightning damage, offensive and defensive ability, +2 to Thermite Mine, and a defensive proc. In the metal slot, we have Mythical Korvax Brand, which gives 15% weapon damage to Fire Strike, which is pretty good with a two-handed weapon, and also +3 to Static Strike and flat lightning damage. Unfortunately, we don't get the Korvax Brand proc because we're not dual wielding. Our belt is Mythical Ulzuin's Torment for flat fire damage, offensive and defensive ability, and +1 to all demolitionist skills. In the relic slot, we have Serenity for +1 to all skills and a bunch of defensive bonuses, including a circuit breaker. I strongly recommend this relic because a sorceress can be pretty squishy, and if your health goes down below the threshold for Blast Shield and Arcane Will, you're going to want to have something else. For our pants, we're using Mythical Fateweaver's leggings for extra elemental damage, +2 to Maven's Sphere of Protection, +2 to its modifier conversion, and +2 to Static Strike, as well as a defensive proc. On the chest slot, we're using Galacros Singed Plating. This comes from Galacros, who's a hero in the Malmoth sewers behind a dynamite wall. These affixes are pretty good, giving us a lot of resistances, and any version of this armor comes with +3 to Explosive Strike. Let's talk about leveling this build. So obviously the Ugdenbog Arcaneweaver that you get from the Ugdenbog areas is the core of this build, so it really comes online around level 40. That's the first time you can pick up one of these. For your lower levels, you can use any gun or crossbow that looks good to you. Fire Strike is a pretty forgiving skill, and it works well with a wide range of weapons. Francis's gun, which you can pick up right outside of Devil's Crossing at level 1, is probably a pretty good place to start. When you get to the Cronley's Gang areas, you can pick up an Incendiary Cask, which is one of the best helms for Fire Strike with that huge flat fire damage and crit damage on the bottom, in addition to more flat fire damage on the top. You can pick this up on your first run through normal, and it also makes a pretty good endgame helm if you just want to keep using it. If you're going to go that route, you probably want a haunted shoulder pad, which you can pick up in the areas north of Fort Icon and also in some parts of Malmouth. This gives +3 to Brimstone, and it will help you convert that chaos damage into elemental damage. There's also another monster infrequent that supports Thermite Mine, the Martin's Crest, which you also get from the Cromley's Gang areas from Moneybag Martin. If you can find the suffix of destruction, that will also give you +2 to Fire Strike. On the belt slot, you can craft a Chosen Girdle, or there's a lower level version of this too. This gives fire and lightning damage and +1 to all demolitionist skills. This blueprint comes from the Kaiman's Chosen faction. If you choose Death's Vigil, their belt blueprint is also pretty good. It gives +1 to all Arcanist skills, so you can choose either side with this character. Your mid-level relic is probably going to be the Plunderer's Talisman, with a huge amount of flat elemental damage and a proc that goes off with our two-handed weapon. That's available at level 60. For the other slots, you can essentially use whatever you pick up that looks good. Fire Strike is a very forgiving skill. It's probably a good place to start if you're a beginner. It becomes available at level 1, and you can use it from level 1 to 100 if you want to. Just start on the Demolitionist side to make sure you get access to that first. Let's go to a Shattered Realm run. I should say, before we do that this character got even better in the new patch 1.2.1. The percentage of weapon damage on Fire Strike was scaled up a bit, and the damage bonus on the crossbow also got a little bit better. I took the Shattered Realm footage before the patch came out. The build is going to be even better now, but you can see it was already doing pretty well on SR75.